Issues of morality can be some of the most controversial, personal, and pressing questions many of us ever face. They can take up a great deal of our social time and attention, and may be inextricably entwined with our own personal identity. And it may be a crucial factor in choosing who we trust as our friends and what we choose to do with our lives professionally. Journalist Robert Wright described human beings as the moral animal, by which he meant that we are alone in the animal kingdom in having an explicit sense of right and wrong. Moreover, this sense is not merely cognitive, it is accompanied by powerful emotions. When someone else commits an immoral act, we often feel angry or disgusted at their actions, whereas feelings of guilt or shame or embarrassment often accompany occasions when we behave immorally. On the other hand, those who show great morality, such as Nelson Mandela or Gandhi, are often revered. And who has not experienced a great swell of pride when we ourselves do someone a favor? The fact that morality is a cultural universal and that it triggers such powerful emotional responses has been taken as suggesting that it is part of human nature. There is also some evidence that morality might reveal its origins in infancy. Research suggests that babies find happy facial expressions pleasurable and pained facial expressions stressful. Hoffman argues that originally morals might be selfish. Pained faces trigger an empathic distress response in a baby, who then acts to reduce their stress by acting to alleviate the person's pain. This simple mechanism means that infants are able to engage in apparently prosocial behavior before they are able to distinguish between self and other. Although this research might explain certain moral universals, it does not explain why morals vary from culture to culture. For instance, the cow, which is widely consumed in the West, is considered sacred in the Hindu religion. How can we explain such variability of moral values? If morals are so useful and yet culturally variable, why didn't natural selection just wire in strong moral sentiments? One answer has been provided by evolutionist Robert Wright, who draws on William Hamilton's explanation of why reciprocal altruism seems to vary so much in the population. Wright suggests that perhaps the optimal moral strategy is contingent upon the particular historical, cultural, and social context in which the individual finds him or herself. As we saw in our discussion on life history theory, when the optimal strategy is contingent, hardwiring makes little sense. If, for instance, you are born with a very strong moral sentiment, you might find yourself outcompeted by conspecifics who are prepared to cheat, steal, and lie. On the other hand, if you were to be born with few moral sentiments, you might be ostracized by a community of high moralists. In the same way that it might pay to adopt a wait-and-see approach to reproductive strategy, the same might apply to morality. Haidt and Joseph propose that there are 5 moral domains that are innate and that these can be modified by cultural learning. These domains are a kind of mental module, although they see modules as being rather more flexible entities than some. They subscribe to teaming modularity, in which modules can be modified by environmental input, can spawn other modules, and are, to some extent, under conscious control. The table shows a list of these domains and the columns with their characteristics shown by rows. The first row lists the possible adaptive challenge that drove the evolution of the particular moral domain. The second row relates to the nature of the trigger to that module. The proper domain are the triggers that the module was evolved to respond to, such as a fly landing in a spider's web can trigger the spider out of its hiding place with the goal to eat the fly. The third row relates to the actual domain, which are the things that trigger the module by virtue of it resembling the proper trigger in some significant way. For example, when the spider's web is touched by inedible seeds or prodding fingers, they can elicit the same response, and such triggers from the actual domain need not be adaptive. To take the harm-care domain in column 1, for example, Haidt and Joseph suggest that there is a real evolutionary benefit to responding with compassion to our own offspring. But other stimuli of baby seals or other people's offspring resemble our own offspring sufficiently to trigger the module. Note that there is no real adaptive value to feeling compassion for seals, although it is arguable if there is adaptive value in feeling compassion for the offspring of others. These 5 basic modules can therefore be modified by cultural learning. Morals are similar from culture to culture because we all share the same basic modules. They vary because culture varies and pushes the module in different directions. Consider purity in the far right column. Some cultures prescribe the eating of certain foods, whereas other cultures might prescribe racism. Both of these prescriptions hook into the purity-sanctity module, giving rise to a feeling of disgust if the idea of eating meat or racism is entertained. Behaving in a moral way and making decisions about the morality of the behavior of others is not simply a matter of slavishly following rules. Frequently, we are required to make decisions that have moral implications, even if it is simply a matter of whether you should cut in line at the supermarket or keep a small sum of money you find on the floor in the lecture hall. Confronted with such situations, we cannot always draw upon explicit rules. We make decisions based upon whether someone would suffer and how much. For instance, we might be more likely to keep money we found in an expensive restaurant than if it was in a soup kitchen, because we might think that in the first instance the person who lost the money would be less likely to miss it. Judging how people might feel as a result of our actions requires a fully operational theory of mind, as we need to imagine how someone might feel as a result of our actions. Consistent with this interpretation, we find that children start to appreciate the nature of morality at around 4 years of age, around the time that theory of mind starts to manifest itself in an adult-like form. One question that might be prompted by discussion of theory of mind is whether sufferers of autism show deficits in moral reasoning ability. So far, there has not been a great deal of research on this issue, but it is likely that sufferers of autism find moral reasoning tasks demanding. Temple Grandin is a high-functioning autistic individual who has published widely in her career as an academic in the Department of Animal Sciences at Colorado State. Despite her intellectual achievement, she admits that she finds the social world something of a mystery. She relates how she developed a set of explicit rules to help her in her interactions with others. Some of them were concerned with morality. Others are concerned with other forms of social transgression, such as really bad things, courtesy rules, and illegal but not bad rules. Primatologist and psychologist Mark Hauser and co-workers presented participants with scenarios describing particular moral dilemmas involving a runaway train. These scenarios were presented to participants as part of an experiment, and the participants were asked whether the behavior in each scenario was morally acceptable. Let's conduct the experiment ourselves and decide whether each scenario is ethical to us. Denise is a passenger on a train whose driver has fainted. On the main track ahead are 5 people. The main track has a side track leading off to the left, and Denise can turn the train onto it. There is 1 person on the side track. Denise can turn the train, killing the 1, or she can refrain from turning the train, letting the 5 die. Is it okay for Denise to redirect the train onto the side track? In Mark Hauser's experiment, 72% of participants agreed with Denise's decision to redirect the train towards 1 person to save 5 people. Frank is on a footbridge over the train tracks. He sees a train approaching the bridge out of control. There are 5 people on the track. Frank knows that the only way to stop the train is to drop a heavy weight onto its path. But the only available, sufficiently heavy weight is 1 large man, also watching the train from the footbridge. Frank can shove the 1 man onto the track in the path of the train, killing him, or he can refrain from doing this, letting the 5 die. Do you think he should push the man off the bridge, or do you think he should do nothing? In the original experiment, only 12% condoned Frank's decision to actually shove someone into the path of the moving train. Both Frank and Denise took matters into their own hands to sacrifice 1 person for the lives of 5 people. But Denise killed a person by pulling a lever, while Frank killed a person by physically pushing him into a train. Ned is walking near the train tracks when he notices a train approaching out of control. Up ahead on the track are 5 people. Ned is standing next to a switch, which he can throw to turn the train onto a side track. There is a heavy object on the side track. If the train hits the object will slow the train down, giving the men time to escape. The heavy object is 1 man standing on the side track. Ned can throw the switch, preventing the train from killing the 5 people, but killing the 1 man. Or he can refrain from doing this, letting the 5 die. Do you think he should pull the switch, or that he should do nothing? Participants were more evenly split on Ned's actions, with 56% expressing approval. His actions were very similar to Denise's, but he took a risk that Denise didn't take. The scenario left open the possibility that he wasn't buying them enough time to get off the tracks. So by pulling the lever, he could have condemned 6 people to death instead of just 5. Oscar is walking near the train tracks when he notices a train approaching out of control. Up ahead on the track are 5 people. Oscar is standing next to a switch, which he can throw to turn the train onto a side track. There is a heavy object on the side track. If the train hits the object will slow the train down, giving the 5 people time to escape. There is one man standing on the side track in front of the heavy object. Oscar can throw the switch, preventing the train from killing the 5 people, but killing the one man. Or he can refrain from doing this, letting the 5 die, should he pull the switch. Finally, 75% of the original participants approved of Oscar's decision. The crucial difference between Ned's scenario and Oscar's may have been that participants were skeptical of whether the heavy man in Ned's scenario would actually slow down the train as much as the big cartoonish weight in Oscar's scenario. The data shows that people will generally opt to kill one person if it saves 5 in the case of Denise, but are much more reluctant in the case of Frank. What's the difference? First, consider the difference between Oscar and Ned. The two scenarios are very similar, but people are generally more accepting of Oscar's scenario, where the man is behind a heavy object but nonetheless dies, than Ned's, where there is no weight, just the man. People can see that there is some difference between the stories of Ned and Oscar, but they can't articulate why. Hauser uses this as evidence for the fact that moral judgments are not necessarily based on conscious reasoning. People act as if they are following a rule, but they do not know what it is. The rule is known as the principle of double effect, which states that it is permissible to do someone harm for the greater good, but only if that harm is as a byproduct of the action, not a means in itself. In other words, if you're trying to slow down a train, it seems more ethical to redirect it towards a heavy weight and indirectly crush a person standing in front of the weight than to directly impede the train by sending it right into a heavy person. In Oscar's scenario, the man's death is a more indirect byproduct of Oscar's actions. In Ned's scenario, directly crashing the train into the heavy man is the conscious goal of Ned's actions. It is the means by which Ned saves the other 5 people. 2 other rules seem to suggest why so few people thought that Frank's action of pushing the fat man off the bridge was acceptable. In addition to the principle of double effect, it also seems that people judge situations where a new threat is introduced, as in pushing the man, more harshly than situations where an existing threat is being redirected, as with the runaway train. Additionally, people are less happy with creating a threat by direct personal means, like physical contact with the individual, rather than at a distance, like pulling a lever. Consider the following scenario. 5 people are dying in a hospital, each as a result of a different organ failing. In the waiting room is a healthy man with fully functioning organs. Is it therefore permissible to use this healthy man's organs to save 5? Most people are not only adamant that this is definitely not morally permissible, they tend to find the idea outrageous because all 3 principles apply. The healthy man is being injured not as a byproduct of your actions, but as the conscious goal of your actions. So the principle of double effect applies. And you are creating a new threat by stealing his organs rather than redirecting a pre-existing threat. And finally, you aren't extracting his organs from a distance, so the direct personal contact makes it seem even worse. The cognitive neuroscientist Josh Green has explored the differences between these moral decisions by examining the underlying brain activity. He has found evidence that 2 brain systems seem to be involved. One is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, DLPC, which is associated with making relatively dispassionate, utilitarian decisions. This is largely involved in making decisions such as in the Denise dilemma, where most people are happy to kill 1 to save 5. In the more emotional dilemmas, such as Frank's pushing the fat man off the bridge, a different brain region, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, VMPC, becomes more active. The VMPC is associated with decisions that have high emotional content. It is active, for example, when a desirable reward is offered, and it seems also to be implicated in people's reluctance to sanction pushing the fat man off the bridge. Koenigs et al. Found that people with damage to the VMPC tend to make more utilitarian decisions, like condoning Frank's decision to push the heavy man off the bridge. It appears the VMPC may also be functioning abnormally in people with psychopathy, and that prisoners diagnosed with low anxiety psychopathy are more likely to make utilitarian judgments. In the aforementioned study, Hauser found no effect of sex, religion, or ethnicity, which suggests that this moral compass might be innate in humans. Perhaps more convincingly, Hauser gave similar dilemmas to what we just explored, making locally relevant changes involving crocodiles and canoes to the Kuna, a tribe in Central America that has little contact with the Western world, and found that they appear to have the same intuitions.